great to catch back up with you. It's been 2023.
End of 2023, I think. So a
Okay.
little over a year.
Yeah, a little over a year. So, well, yeah, we're hooking up in a new year here. You got new material out, so I'm looking forward to getting into the Elemental Quartet, A Small Patch of Earth. So, thank you for taking a minute out.
Of course.
So, talk to me a little bit about heading into this new year, new album. Everything's, there's a lot of uncertainty and things going on in the world. How you feeling?
That's a big question. Um, yeah, I to be perfectly honest with you, I have a small child now. I have a kid who's about a year and a half old, and um, that works as a pretty good distraction from the things that you'd rather not think about in life sometimes. So,
Well said.
um, dealing with that, doing what we can, figuring out musical stuff and trying to find time to practice all of those things. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at headed into 2025, I guess.
Well said. Yeah, kids have that way of kind of making the world look good. It's that Mr. Rogers filter. It's a good place to be in. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm only saying I'm reading a book now of all times in my life to read and delve into the world of Mr. Rogers. Like now is the perfect time to do it, just because
Mm.
he really genuinely was the guy that was on the camera, that was off the camera. Anyway, I'm getting into that whole kids thing, but I'm curious. Talk to me a little bit about this album. How did it
Mhm.
start? How did it come to light? How did you ultimately push this to a point that everybody's listening to it?
Yeah. Well, um, so we talked last year about the last time I did was this group called Five Plus Four, which is a nine-piece album, nine-piece group. Um, and the album I did before that was a big band, like a full jazz big band with 18 people in the group. And um, I think the reason I started this particular band is I just, you know, uh, both those projects with those are large ensembles for jazz music. And I was just kind of getting a little bit um, overwhelmed is too strong a word, but I had been doing a lot of really intensive writing for larger groups that just took a lot of kind of time. And I enjoyed kind of having this sense of control over everything um, that you get when you're writing for that many people because you really have to plan everything out. But I also just felt I was maybe getting a little bit too far away from just kind of like the essence of what we think of as jazz music, which is the sort of improvisational and kind of uh, the conversational element of it. Um, so basically, this was right. I started this band right around the time that I was really working on the music for that Five Plus Four group, that nine-piece ensemble. Um, and I kind of just was like, I want to see if I can have a band that I feel good about, where I basically am just writing lead sheets. So, in jazz, you get like the real book, and it's got just like one page. It's basically just melody with chords. Um, and the tunes on this album are not quite that simple, but that was kind of where I started from with writing this music. Is I wanted to see if I could just like write some lead sheets that I felt good about. Um, and the joke that I said to the guys in this band was like, I'm tired of having parts that are like 7 pages long. I want to see if we can just do this with 1 or 2 pages for all of these tunes. So, um, in a sense, I kind of just wanted to get uh, sort of back to simplicity a little bit. And I was doing a lot of listening to um, kind of like folk inspired jazz music at the time. So people like Bill Frisell, I listened to a ton of Bill Frisell in the year or two that I was working on this. Um, and people like that, and like some of Brad Meldau's albums that kind of get a little more into that folksy side and just sort of things like that. Um, and this is sort of what we came up with. And this group kind of was in the works for a long time. I think it was horrible timing. Our first gig that we ever played was in January of 2020. Um, and we're all excited about like new band. We're gonna do all this cool stuff. And then of course that
Yeah.
was the only gig we played before the pandemic happened. Um, so it took a while to kind of get things going again, but we've been playing together as this group. basically, aside from a couple of subs here and there with basically the same four guys, for, you know, I guess that would be almost 5 years now. Um, so we're pretty familiar with each other, and um, I do think the group gets it, that kind of the interconnectedness element that I was sort of looking for. So,
It's interesting you mentioned Bill Frisell. I saw him in Kansas City here, and it was early March, and
mhm.
I think the first COVID case came out. When I look back at it historically, and they played at the big art museum. We have the Nelson Atkins, and I'd always heard about Bill Frisell, and um, I always take my wife to these shows, and she's always like, "What is this?" And I'll be like, "Sometimes this is Major League Jazz. It's coming from either New York or Frisco or wherever." And I mean, this is real deal stuff. Or I'll kind of give him a backdrop. And she was like, "What am I supposed to expect out of Bill Frisell?" And I said, "I have no idea." Like, there was no way that I could give her some like measurable marker. But I remember when he came out. I'd never seen somebody pluck the guitar like that. I thought he was going to pull the strings off of
Mm,
it. Like he was cling. It was the weirdest movement, not in a bad way, but it was just, I'd never seen it. And just the way he was doing it and the way that the string reverberated and the way that everybody responded around him, it was magical, man. There's something about him that transcends the what's on the page and what you're expecting out of a jazz
yeah,
group.
yeah. And he's done a lot of different things too. Like you go back to like when he first kind of showed up in the 80s, and a lot of that is like pretty out jazz, and then like he's also doing some of what I think is like the most accessible jazz music that's out there too. So um, yeah, he's great.
It's great. So talk to me a little bit about, this is your fifth album. Every album is either a snapshot in time, it captures an essence or a vibe you're going through. It kind of measures the trajectory, the arc of your career. Talk to me a little bit about what each of these new chapters mean, and more specifically, this fifth chapter as a leader. What
Mm.
does this mean for you, and how has it made you grow as a musician?
Yeah, that's a good question. I like I mentioned, there's definitely sort of like a pendulum swinging aspect to this, where I had made these couple of kind of larger. I started my first two recordings, which the first one is over 10 years old now. Those two were for quintet, and I had this quintet that I did my first two albums on. Um, that it was, traditional jazz quintet instrumentation, but uh, there was a lot of writing for that group too. Um, and then I did these two larger group albums, and now, so like, I think I'm just kind of swinging the pendulum back. This is the smallest group I ever recorded, the least involved compositionally, I would say, the least stuff happening on each of the pages, just kind of letting the band do a little bit of talking. And I think what that kind of reflects in me is a couple of things. Um, I think, you know, I'm I don't want to seem like I feel like I'm getting wiser, because I guess that's not really for me to say. But I do feel like I'm a little more comfortable with myself, both as a composer and as a musician at this point in my career. So I think partially why I was comfortable doing um, these compositions for small groups that don't necessarily show off a whole lot, I think is partially because I'm a little more comfortable with myself as a composer. I don't feel like I need to prove myself necessarily. Um, which like definitely, when you're writing for big band, it's such a huge project on a big band. You want to show everybody what you can do. Whereas now I'm kind of just like, all right, let's just find some tunes that we can use as kind of a template for this group, and get the right vibes. Um, for this group to kind of show what they can do. So I think that's part of it. I also think I'm a little more comfortable with myself as a trumpet player at this point, like being 100% kind of forthcoming about it. I've always felt more comfortable as a musician than I have as a trumpet player, if that makes sense. Where I
Right.
always felt like my trumpet playing was a little behind where my head was, in terms of like understanding the music. And I still definitely have flaws as a trumpet player, I think, but I do feel like I'm getting a little better, and I think that's part of where I can do a project like this now, where even in a quintet, like I could kind of hide behind um, the other horn player. You know, I always played with Dustin Lorenzi on tenor saxophone. And he gives me a little bit of support, a little place where I don't feel like I have to carry quite so much. Um, but I feel, I guess, just a little more comfortable doing that kind of thing now. So I think getting to this point in my career, so to speak, it's a lot of that. It's kind of just like, I guess I'm just a little more comfortable with myself now in the second half of my 30s than I was when I started making these recordings over 10 years ago. So.
So it must be refreshing and easier now to perform this live since it's not such a big outfit. Is that true?
Yeah, it's definitely less stressful. Those other groups getting gigs for those groups is just really hard. You have to plan way ahead, and it's hard to find gigs that pay enough money to pay that many people in the band, you know. Um, so it's definitely easier to put things together, and these are all good friends. Like all four people in this, or all three of the other people in this quartet, are people that I knew for a while before making this band. So Brian, the bass player, he and I go way back. We went to college together, um, back in the late 2000s, if you would call them that, I guess, in like the second half of the first decade of the 2000s. Um, and Devin, the drummer, he and I have been playing gigs together. Um, uh, we had never, I guess, technically been part of the same band, so to speak, but he had subbed in two of my previous bands. We'd done a lot of small group gigs together. And Matt was the guitarist on my big band album in 2019. Um, and he's just kind of an amazing musician who can do everything. So I was comfortable with these people even before we started um, playing together as this group. Um, and I'm always of the opinion too that a huge part of the success for a project like this is really planning ahead and thinking about who's going to work best for this type of music. So I felt like I thought about it for a long time and made the right decisions, and it's been pretty easy to play with these guys.
So ultimately, at the end of the day, what are you hoping the listener gets from this album?
Um, I guess I would answer that in the way that I think kind of what I'm hoping to get from this album, which is kind of just a little bit of peace of mind. So I've talked a couple times about sort of simplifying, and I'm not trying to get like the whole like a simple life is a better life. Like I don't necessarily ascribe to that belief. Um, but you did mention that there's, you know, a lot going on in the world that doesn't exactly give us peace of mind. Um, and the concept of the title, the tune that gave the album its title, A Small Patch of Earth, like it, there is a very specific image in my head about what that comes to that I don't even necessarily feel like I need to share because I don't want to impose what I see onto other people. But there's definitely an aspect of just like kind of, you know, like sort of just taking a deep breath, um, kind of pausing a little bit, um, and you know, there's a nature element to a lot of these songs too that I think is just, you know, I'm up in Wisconsin. I After having spent 10 years in bigger cities, I live in what is almost rural Wisconsin at this point, and um, you know, there's downsides to that, but one of the great things about it is just kind of being able to experience um, kind of nature all the time. Um, and I think it's important for us as people, and it's part of kind of what goes into this album too. So that whole kind of just pausing and reflecting, I think, is a big part of what I would want people to get from this.
You know, I think we're stepping up to a new time in our American history where going into 2025, I think a lot of people are like, uh-oh, what's going to happen? But I
Mm.
think that music is kind of a saving grace. I think about all the times that like Dizzy and Louis would go over into these war-torn areas and they would stop fighting, and there was always this celebration. And it was, especially with jazz, there's just this level that makes you swing and feel good about life. Do you feel like, having new material out, being a part of a cadre of artists that are putting out this music is hopefully going to make things feel a little bit better as we head into this uncertain moment of American history?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to think that. I think of something that my friend Joe Clark, who is a great he's a composer and a music teacher and a comic book artist actually in Chicago, but uh, Joe said something at some point in the last decade when, one of these crazy things was happening to us. He said something about um, whether you believe music can change the world or if it's just a thing that you think makes the world worth living in. Music is still a thing that we need. I think there's a lot of power in that because, like, some people do believe that music can change the world. I don't know that I always feel like that, but I do think that it is one of the coolest things that human beings have ever done.
Yeah.
Um, and I do think it can change the world for a person. Um, so, music changed the world for me when I was younger, and that's why I still do it. Um, and I don't know, it's definitely a place to retreat to, um, which I fear we're all going to need at times. But um, I also think that if you can kind of just uh, kind of let that worldview expand a little bit, I think it can make a difference. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I dig it. So if anyone wants to pick up a copy of the album, is Bandcamp the best place to go?
Yeah, Bandcamp, Shifting Paradigm Records on Bandcamp is where you will find it, and that is the best place to get that. It is also on Spotify and Apple Music and things like that. But I always tell people if they want to financially support artists, use Bandcamp. Um,
Yeah,
it's just we get way more of that
totally.
from anything
Totally
else.
get it. So what about touring? Anything else going on in your world? How can people catch up?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It would have been really dumb if I forgot to bring that up. So we are doing like a mini tour later this month. We're gonna play in Madison and Appleton, Wisconsin, and our first time in Appleton, and Milwaukee and Chicago. So we'll just do four days in about a week, kind of near the end of January. So I'll be keeping up to date on that. So if you find me on social media, anything like that, Instagram or Facebook or even Blue Sky, um, I will keep people up to date on that. But yeah, Madison, Appleton, Chicago, Milwaukee at the end
Okay,
of January.
cool. Well, Paul, it's great to catch up with you again with the new material. Best of luck. Have a great 2025. And hopefully at some point, I can swing through the area and see you live.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks a lot, Joe.
Thanks, Paul. Take care.